Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I know it's a little funny I'm seated, but I wanted to welcome you all. My name is Karen Sleezer. I work for the University of Virginia with our Center for Transportation Studies. This is our second of our new Lunch and Learn seminar series, where we're having VTRC, or we're partnering with VTRC so they can present research results to the field. And this is the first one that we've done away from Charlottesville. We have about, I didn't count yet, 15 people maybe in the room in person, and maybe some more people drifting in. We have over 50 people registered for virtual participation. So I wanted to thank the virtual attendees and the in-person attendees. I and the presenters are going to do this seated because it works better for the cameras. The cameras in this room are not functional. They're being replaced in 2 weeks. So we're making do with a laptop camera. So I wanted to introduce our first topic and our first speaker, and then around 12:30 we'll switch to our second topic and second speakers, and there's some overlap, I think, between the two of them. So our first topic is the development of two-lane rural road systemic safety improvement plan, and our speakers are Hun Chow and Ben Cottrell from the Virginia Transportation Research Council. Ben is an associate principal researcher scientist at VTRC, and his areas of emphasis are traffic safety and traffic engineering. He has a master's in civil engineering from the University of Virginia and is a registered professional engineer in Virginia. And Hun Cho is a research scientist at VTRC. He has a PhD in civil engineering from Virginia Tech and is also a registered professional engineer. His research involves driver compliance on speed limits, characteristics of roadway departure and one-way crashes, and new network screening methods on Virginia roadways. So I will let Hun, you're gonna go first, Hun, or Ben? So Hun is gonna be first, talking about the rural road safety plan. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. One correction from the bio. I graduated Georgia Tech, not Virginia Tech. So.
Did I read it wrong?
Yes, Mark. Yeah. Today I'm gonna present the research result that Ben and I and In-Q Lim, who is now working on Federal Highway, we work together on this two-lane rural road systemic safety improvement plan. This project was completed fall in 2020. So a little bit of background. There are about 33,000 lane mile of two-lane rural road in Virginia. And we found that about 10,000 roadway departure crashes per year are occurred on these roads. And those crashes are widely distributed. A couple of hotspots, but mostly on widely dispersed on the whole entire of the Virginia. So we found that to deploy a systemic low-cost countermeasure is most efficient way to solve the problem. So this project proposed to develop a systemic safety improvement plan for two-lane rural roads roadway departure crash using low-cost countermeasure. To speak of systemic approach, for the problem detections, we identify crash characteristics and location-related factors that contribute to the highest number of serious crashes using the data-driven analysis. And for the solution, we want to widely implement low-cost countermeasures over several locations with similar crash characteristics on the roadway features. So for data part, we collected and conflate 5 years of crash data and roadway network data. So for the network screening of roadway departure crashes, by using those features of crashes and roadway network, which include AADT, traffic informations, functional class, lane width, shoulder width, and speed limits. So by combining those two big data sets, crash and roadway network, roadway network, data. We calculate the potential for safety improvement. We say PSI from here for each segment. And then we use machine learning technique, which we use shade decision tree analysis, which estimate the value of target variable, which here is whether that segment is PSI greater than 0 or less than 0, and based on those input variables that I mentioned before. Here are some of the screenshots of the tree analysis results. So from doing machine learning, the algorithm detect the target roadway characteristics for roadway departure crash hotspots or the similar features throughout the network. So from that, we found that those 4 criteria were detected, which is surface width is less than 10 feet, and shoulder width is less than 3 feet, speed limit is 25. Mostly this covers all of 2-lane Buda road, and especially the ADT is less than 1,000. And using those information, we generated a spreadsheet by districts. But one point is, as those features were sometimes was not continuous, but districts, we aggregated those hot spot areas. So in here, the first row is the and we aggregated by routes. So starting my point was 4 to 26, and those total, we calculate total numbers of roadway crashes and the percentage of those crashes compared to roadway departure crashes compared to the total crash. And we also produce some countermeasures, low-cost countermeasures listings and their estimated cost and CMF. In this slide, it only shows 4 that we will use in the next projects, but we produced a couple of more than 20 or 25 countermeasures we could implement on those sites. So for the conclusion from this research, we found that about 8,000 miles of 2-lane Buda roads shows PSI, which it shows potential for the safety improvement is positive for roadway departure crashes. And about more than 5,000 miles were selected as target segments from our analysis. And we concluded systemic safety improvement plan would be efficient to handle those roadway departure crashes. And we recommended that VDOT should lead and promote the outcome of this research and implement those to the real world target area. So for the implementation, TOD agreed to implement those countermeasures to those sites that we produce. And we expect the benefit will be reducing the crashes, and potential BC ratio could range from 10 to 30. And our next speaker will introduce the implementation projects of it.
Thank you, Hyun. Can you hear me okay? As Hyun mentioned, I'll talk about the implementation pilot, which is a follow-up to the research. This just shows a copy of the research report, which is available on our website if you're interested. The study output from the research report, as Hyun mentioned, was a safety improvement plan to deploy treatments systemically on 2-lane rural roads as part of the VDOT safety program. It was a 4-step process that was generated in the report. The first step was that VDOT's Traffic Operations Division would provide a spreadsheet of selected corridors and a GIS shapefile to the district traffic engineers. And the DTEs would review this list, then plan and conduct studies. From there, they would select sites and propose treatments and look at a P over C ratio for those treatments. And finally, the DTEs will request and then allocate funds so that they can go out and actually initiate implementation of treatments. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that the Research Council has an implementation program, and basically it supports the implementation of research and innovations. So the key is identifying opportunities to improve technology and business practices for VDOT. From this, there was an opportunity to request that we put together ideas for future implementation efforts, and we proposed to pilot test this safety plan and also fund some treatments. So the purpose of this particular implementation pilot is basically to implement the plan that Hen just provided in terms of looking at two-lane rural road safety. Often we refer to it as a two-lane rural pilot since it's such a long title. The scope was limited to about 60 corridors, and with time and funding constraints, the countermeasures focused on signs, chevrons, and some limited markings. So in preparation for this study, we did three things. First, we solicited district staff to see if they were willing and interested in participating in the pilot. Then we developed the scope and some cost estimates based on the response we got from the districts. And then we set up an implementation project. We had 5 tasks as part of this project. The first was to develop guidance on the pilot process. We had to come up with exactly how we're going to do this and have a good system for record keeping and accounting since we're spending money among multiple districts. We also wanted to be available to support the district staff as we move forward with this effort. So essentially, we were serving as the project manager for coordinating all the activities for the pilot. One of the key things was to obtain some feedback and lessons learned from the district staff to see what could be done better when we take this statewide. And the final task was just to document the findings and all the activities that was part of the pilot. For the process, 6 of the 9 VDOT districts actually participated in this. We actually had a 7th one which wanted to participate, but then they ended up having to withdraw because they didn't have the resources necessary to meet the deadlines. We held monthly meetings, most of them were virtual, about 30 minutes long, where we met with the district staff and we got updates on how they were doing in terms of moving forward with the pilot problem, and also to provide any assistance that might be needed in terms of obstacles that were encountered and figure out how to go around it. We found that using a Google Shared Drive was a good means for sharing and exchanging data, as well as compiling information on the pilot. The 6 districts ended up installing countermeasures at 45 sites. We had 2 sites in the Northern Virginia district, 6 in Culpeper and Richmond, 9 in Bristol, 10 in Lynchburg, and 12 in Salem. The next few slides give some examples of what we actually installed as part of the pilot. This first one is in Route 619 in width, where we show some chevrons. Next is Route 626, where we have curve warning signs and advisory speed limit signs at Chesterfield. Here's Route 810 in Culpeper District, where we have curve warning signs and chevron signs. Route 692 in Roanoke County, not too far from us, we have a curve warning arrow. And here's some delineators on Pennsylvania County. This site in Northern Virginia, Route 287, probably has the most variety of different countermeasures. Here they went from 4 to 6 inch wide markings for edge line and center lines. They have chevrons and a warning sign with the retroreflective signpost. The vast majority of countermeasures were oriented towards road departure crashes. However, we had a couple of examples of countermeasures which were improving the two-lane rural roads, but yet they were not tied with roadway departure crashes. And this is two examples of them. One was some advanced intersection warning signs and a do not pass sign for a do not pass zone in Chesterfield, Powhatan County in the Richmond District. In summary, we had a couple of things we think is worth mentioning. First, 4 of the 6 districts actually had consultants to assist in the process. And the primary reason was that we had a tight timeline and some of the districts didn't have enough, internal resources to accommodate the timeline and the needs. So they went with some assistance by having consultants help. In at least one district, the residency was helping out quite a bit with the workload. We also realized that since we would have several hundred signs and chevrons being requested at the same time from the sign shop, that we needed to take into account the VDOT sign shop workload as well. So we gave them a heads up on what we were doing, so they were able to manage their inventory to accommodate the needs for this particular effort. Most of the sites were completed within 10 months. As I mentioned, we were on a pretty short time schedule. We actually went a little bit beyond what the initial plan was, but everything worked out well. The district and residency staff were quite driven to get this done. So we were really happy to have them help us with it. And they were also grateful for the additional safety funds that were available through this effort. One thing we did not expect, but it turned out that most of the districts distributed the sites among the residencies. Like Ken showed an example of the spreadsheet with the prioritized order by the number of road departure crashes. They could have easily just taken the ones at the top of the list. Instead, they actually made sure that they were distributed among the residencies and not just all focused in one area. Ken mentioned earlier about some of the aggregation we did with the sites. So the corridor length varied from less than a half a mile to well over 20 miles. As a result, the average cars per site ranged from like 4,600 to 23,000. And the average cars per mile ranged from 540 to just under 3,000. The main reason for this wide variety in costs is linked to the fact that different services and activities were charged to the project. For example, some districts only charged implementation, others charged the preliminary engineering work as well. So that's a big difference. And the site length obviously is a big factor in terms of the number of countermeasures that will be installed per site. Well, some of the lessons learned, one of the first things we came across was the need for screening the sites for 2 reasons. The first was to remove sites that are already being considered as part of other safety efforts. VDOT had an HSIP curve delineation program underway, and some of the sites on our list were actually part of that program as well. And the second reason is to reduce the number of sites and to prioritize them. I think Salem District probably had a good example on a scheme for prioritizing the sites, and we actually included that in the report. Coordinating with the VDOT residency seemed to be a key activity, and this was really helpful to get feedback since the residencies knew a lot about the sites, the potential sites that we were looking at. And like I mentioned, at least in one district, the residencies actually took the lead in terms of identifying sites where to install the countermeasures and actually doing the installation. One district mentioned a possible need for guidance in site review and identifying segments to treat and select the countermeasures. The other districts seem to be okay with us providing some very basic framework, and they went out and made the decisions as to what sites to use, what segments within the sites to treat, and actually suggesting what countermeasures to install. I think one of the things that did come up was specifically the use of the retroreflective signposts. There was some desire to have some guidance as to when to use those. Another concern we just came up was the maintenance of pavement markings should be considered in the decision-making process. The service life for the signs are probably close to 15 years, whereas the markings will have to be retraced after 2 to 3 years. We are providing money up front for the initial installation, but we're not providing money for the maintenance. So that's something that needs to be considered when you're making a decision about what to do in terms of the countermeasure installations. I mentioned the timeline and the funding for the pilot was very restrictive, and that provided some limits for us. However, for the HSIP program, it should be a much greater time period, and they'll have an option to use a lot more different countermeasures as well. I guess the good news is that starting last month, VDOT began the program to deploy about $150 million worth of low-cost countermeasures on two-lane rural roads, which is a result of this particular research effort. So this will be the next phase of our HSIP investment strategy. Another good news here is that most of the districts will have the program managed by the Traffic Operations Divisions and not the DTE. So that helps them in terms of not providing an extra workload for them. Wanted to acknowledge the 6 districts that participated again. We appreciate all their assistance, and we could not have done it without them. Are there any questions or comments?
So I'm just going to interrupt and say that the remote audience, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and speak up. We're not going to know you're doing that, so there might be 2 people speaking at the same time, but we'll just take turns. And anyone in the in-person audience as well, just raise your hand.
Yes, sir.
Please press the back.
Part of that $150,000 that's going in, or 150 million, whatever it was, those HSIP projects, are they going to be able to use the money to restrike, you're saying every 2 to 3 years?
That's it. Well, HSIP money tends to be like a one-time use, and that doesn't necessarily have maintenance dollars tied in with it over time. So my guess is no. I think the HSIP is that correct? I think we got some folks in the room who have been administrating HSIP for quite a while, usually more like one-time installations and not ongoing maintenance. That's a different pot of money.
Do you have any other questions in the room?
Brett?
Yeah, Ben, did a good presentation. I think this pilot worked into the HSIP two-lane rural roads funding that you're referring to. Are those corridors going to be designated through like Power BI tool, or what the eligibility corridors? Are we sort of going to be taking that and coming up with our own locations? I mean, it's where that was.
That's a good question. I don't know the details and exactly how the HSIP program will be administered. So I'm not sure at this point if they've decided exactly how that's going to be handled. So I don't know. I was hesitating because I guess the central office safety side is kind of in flux with some changes in staff. So ultimately, I guess the assistant division administrator for safety, or perhaps Tracy, would be the one who's administering the program and would know the details. But I don't know exactly how they would plan to manage that piece.
We have a whole Power BI tool with high-risk rural road screening that kind of dictates the areas, the rural areas that we would focus our dollars on. It's a little bit different program, but it's basically targeting the exact same type of countermeasures and the same type of roadways. So I'm wondering if those two are kind of interconnected or not. But I understand you may not have that answer, but it does seem like it's kind of overlaps with programs now. Because high-risk rural roads really is the type of work that you would be doing on the same type of roadways that this funding is going to be designated to. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I certainly hope that they are coordinating among the similar
Right.
programs, but I don't know the details at this
Okay.
point.
Thanks.
I
I want
wonder,
to ask the remote audience if there's any questions there. In case unmuting doesn't work for you, you can always type in chat, and our online facilitators, Karen or Mary Ann, can read it to us. We don't see the chat this turn. Give it 2 seconds for the remote audience. Lindsay, did we have someone unmute? Yeah, oh, it- All right, I guess that doesn't say anything. I did have a question. You mentioned that you would prioritize sites differently, and I think you mentioned that that was in a report. But what criteria would you use to prioritize sites differently?
the example that I'll give, which is based on what the Salem districts decided on, I think, Brett, you might need to help me out. I guess Jim was maybe the one that came up with it, but if I recall, the first thing that they used was a criteria of at least 3 roadway departure crashes. In the list, if you get down to the bottom of the list, there may have been some sites that may have only had 1 roadway departure crashes in 5 years. So I guess their decision was they weren't going to do anything that had fewer than 3 crashes. That was the first criteria. And that's the one that stick out the most in terms of prioritizing. I don't recall what might have been the second one. Brett, does anything? I know we didn't prepare you for this. And Jim
Yeah, I know
probably
Jim was
handled
on the line, he may recall, but yes, I know we cut off anything, it was such a big list to work from that we had to pare it down. It was just overwhelming to try to figure out where to start. So we cut off anything, less than 3 crashes. We said, that's not where we're gonna try to focus our energy. And then I know we took off what we did.
Or 3 crashes on the whole road.
Well, it started out as our initial cut was just 3 crashes on the segment.
Yeah.
However long the
However long the
Right.
segment was, that was the first cut. And then we did look at it per mile after that, to cut down even more. I don't remember if it was 3 or if it was 2, but we did cut those out. We also cut out ones that we had already invested money in. So we had a bunch of traffic studies that we'd already done on some of these routes that we knew. So that cut out a whole group, another group. And then we took, whenever we got down to that, what was a manageable list, we sent them to the residencies and asked for their input on which routes they thought would make the most sense. And we were one of the ones who disseminated across the resident engineers. We didn't want to focus it all on one residency. So we came up with like a top 5, I think, of the routes that we felt like, hey, we've never invested any money here. I know we had 2 out in Craig County, for example. We rarely spend money out in Craig County. So that was one of the ones we felt was a great opportunity to do that. We sent it to the resident engineers, but these are our top 5. Help us with your knowledge determine where we want to pare it down more. And if Jim's on the line, he may very well remember there was at least 2 other screening criteria that we used, but I'd almost have to see it in front of me to remember.
Thanks. So those are I guess the 3 key ones. We first are removing overlaps where sites are already being addressed. The 3, or I guess you could pick any number. We chose 3, at least 3 crashes. And then the third thing is getting the residency input as part of the prioritization process.
Any other questions in person or in remote before we switch to the other speaker?
Quickly, success, right? You go back and look before and after, kind of, did it make a difference? Rural roads, does that take a longer period of time to see?
Well,
Is a lower exposure?
we are planning to go back somewhere after 3 years at least to do it before and after. So right now we're planning to use the same traditional amount of time, 3 to 5 years. Whether or not it'll take longer, yet that's a good point. Because of crashes, the number of crashes are lower. It may be that the 5-year period would be preferred over the 3-year period. So But somewhere in that time frame, between 3 to 5 years from now, that there's a plan to do it before and after. That's a good point.
And then I remember another one of the criteria that did cut out a lot. And that was, there were a lot of segments that were short. They were less than a half mile. I think we said less than a half mile, we're not going to get the return on investment that we want. We can go handle that with our routine safety review. It's not going to give you the benefit of the pilot program if we're looking at such a small area. I'd go send my guys out there and go post a couple of wide road signs. But so we focused on corridors that were longer segment. I know we were one of the ones that pushed 20 miles on one of our corridors. Route 658 in Craig County, I think it was 18 plus miles that we felt like we were going to get a bigger return on your investment and maybe more results for your pilot program. So we did cut out any short segments, which was a lot. That removed a lot of them right there. So.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate that input. In fact, when we found out that this lunch and learn would be in Salem, I was thinking you and Jim could probably present it since you all did it. So we appreciate your input.
All right, thank you so much.
We are going to see Kyun and Ben again, but we're also going to have a new third presenter for our second topic. So our second topic is characteristics of wrong way driving crashes. And I believe all three presenters are going to be sharing, but our third presenter I wanted to introduce, we have Erin Robertis. She is a research scientist at the Virginia Transportation Research Council, and she holds a PhD in civil engineering from UVA, where I actually met her a long time ago. And she's done previous research on multimodal virtual reality simulation and behavioral transportation research. So I will let Erin come and get started with topic 2. Do you need to call it up, or do I need to?
I think it was. Let me stop sharing the other one.
And then coming back.
Share screen again.
Okay. Can the audience see the PowerPoint that says systematic evaluation?
Yes, we can, Karen.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, I'll let Erin take a seat.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us during your lunch break. I'll be talking about a project that Hyun, Ben, and I have been working on. It started last spring and it's concluding this fall on wrong way driving crashes and countermeasures on VDOT roadways. So a little bit of background on the motivation for this topic. Wrong way driving crashes are less frequent than many other crash types, but when they do occur, they are typically more severe because they tend to be head-on crashes, and they're more likely to result in a fatality. If we look at statistics nationwide from 2010 to 2018, there were 2,921 fatal wrong way crashes, which resulted in 3,885 fatalities. Some characteristics about these types of crashes are that they more frequently occur at night, the drivers are often under the influence, and elderly drivers are overrepresented in this driver population. So the purpose and the scope of this study was to perform an evaluation of wrong way driving incidents and crashes on VDOT roadways and develop a toolbox of systemic wrong way driving countermeasures for Virginia. And the scope, the work primarily focuses on limited access highway ramps and interchanges and some non-limited access divided highways. So we did not consider wrong way driving on one-way streets or undivided roads, or look at incidents where the driver crossed an undivided road or traversed the median of a divided highway. The tasks for this project were to do a literature review, collect and analyze the relevant wrong-way driving data, and then to look at statewide limited access highway interchanges and ramps and some non-limited access divided highways to identify risk factors, and then identify countermeasures and make a plan to systemically deploy treatments. So the literature review was conducted with some assistance from the VTRC library. It included a review of best practices in other states regarding identifying wrong-way driving crashes, countermeasures, and technology-based detection solutions. And notably, there is an ongoing NCHRP project, Wrong-Way Driving Solutions, Policy, and Guidance. So some of the wrong-way driving data that we looked at included crash data, 911 data, and VA traffic data. And we, after reviewing the available data, we chose to focus mainly on the crash data and the 911 data. So I'll talk a little bit more about both of those data sets. So the crash data we looked at from January 2016 to July 2022, and there were 170 wrong-way driving crashes identified. 85% of them were on interstates, 62% were fatal or injury, 47% head-on crashes, 15% off-road crashes, 14% sideswipe opposite direction crashes, primarily occurring at night between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. And of the 156 wrong-way drivers that we had information about, 50% of them were driving under the influence. So just to highlight those characteristics that really are consistent with the national trends that we see for wrong-way driving crashes. And then to talk a little bit about the 911 call data that we reviewed, we looked at calls between January 2016 and July 2022, so the same time frame. There were a little over 7,500 calls that were flagged as wrong-way driving calls. 52% of them occurred at night, and we were able to geolocate a little over half of them. This data set has lower quality location data compared to the crash data, but of the ones that we were able to identify, 72% occurred on interstates. We also incorporated interchange data into our study, VDOT interchange and intersection influence areas, and then signal information near the intersection. And then to talk a little bit about the methodologies that we've used to analyze this data. So we used a network screening method to estimate the wrong-way driving entry points. So if we're thinking about a wrong-way driving crash that occurs on the interstate, trying to figure out where that driver entered the interstate is one of the most challenging questions. It's typically not in the crash report. As I mentioned, the drivers are usually often intoxicated, nighttime. They don't know where they entered the interstate. So it's a challenge to estimate. There's some research where researchers have attempted to make an estimate of how far wrong-way drivers tend to go. So one Florida study estimated that 58% of wrong-way vehicles travel less than one exit and about 95% less than 4 exits, but that could vary considerably depending on the region. So the method that we utilized was a weighted wrong-way driving crash entry method, which was appropriate for the data that we had, crash and interchange data. And it basically identifies high-risk interchanges based on historical statewide crash data. So we give a weight to an interchange that is related to a crash. So if a crash occurred on a ramp, or we know from the crash report where the entry point was, then we weight that as a 1. We have high confidence in it. If we don't know where the entry point was, then we look at the first possible entry point, so the nearest downstream exit ramp from the crash, and then we weight that as 0.75. And then we weight the second possible entry point, so the next downstream exit ramp, as 0.25. And then if we look at all of those ramps that have been given a weight, we can rank the ones that come up more frequently. So for example, this is one interchange that was ranked highly. We also looked at the percentage of interchange types for wrong way driving entries compared to the percentage of those interchange types across the state. So if there were some that were overrepresented in the wrong way driving data. And what we found was that wrong way driving crashes were widely dispersed across interchange types. There were not major trends, although we did see that Trumpet, Partial Cloverleaf A, and Diamond interchanges show slightly higher percentage of wrong way driving entry compared to their interchange type statewide. We also looked at the top 50 ranked sites and inspected them visually by satellite and street image, and they were primarily Diamond and Partial Cloverleaf interchanges. So Diamond interchanges, which were typically rural, low traffic, and not lighted. And then Partial Cloverleaf interchanges, which partial cloverleafs are consistently cited in the literature as an interchange type, which is more susceptible to wrong way driving incidents. So that kind of tracks with trends that we see in other states. Some additional observations were that there were some locations which were ranked highly that had a long ramp access from where the driver would have entered the ramp to where they ultimately would have gotten on the freeway. So we suspect there could be a site distance issue in those types of locations. We also noted that there had been changes to some locations that occurred during our data analysis period. So if we're looking at a crash in 2016, what we're observing on Google Satellite View, there may have been updates to those locations. And then additionally, we are using the 911 data to do an assessment of some multi-lane divided roads. So we put out a survey to district traffic engineers, and they identified 8 potential sites or corridors for some targeted investigation. And we are reviewing Google Maps for signing, geometrics, and preparing to make some recommendations on those locations. And we chose to use the 911 call data to assess these sites because although that data is less reliable in terms of the location and direction information, it has much greater coverage outside of freeways compared to the crash data. And then some of our last steps in the project will be to identify countermeasures that we recommend using some standard templates and an approach which will allow for customization of countermeasures. And there are many different types of roadway countermeasures that can affect the likelihood of wrong way driving occurring. So some things that we'll consider are pavement markings, signage, geometry. There are also some ITS countermeasures there where it's possible to detect a wrong way driver and then provide a warning sign, additional warning to that driver to inform them that they are traveling the wrong way. And our countermeasure recommendations will primarily focus on a systemic approach on low cost, broadly applicable countermeasures. So those are some of the steps that we're still working on, and we'll be wrapping those up and developing the systemic plan and completing the report by the end of October of this year. So that's all I have, but we are happy to take any questions on this topic.
Here's some questions. I'm going to start with the remote audience first. Any questions right now from the remote audience? I'll give it a few seconds. Remember, you can just unmute or you can use the chat feature. Okay, I'll ask the in-person audience. Any questions?
No question, but I'll offer a comment. Several years ago, we had a location where it was 460 in Giles County. Eastbound is flat, straight by the river, and then there's a separation, and westbound goes through the bluffs area, so up on the mountain. And we had some concerns expressed by some folks in the county, and we did a lot of research into our crash data. Nothing happening to speak of, so we were like, oh, we may not have a problem there. But come to find out, there was a tremendous record of 911 calls. So, you know, you could toss half of them. If half of them were true, it was a whole lot more represented than the actual crash experience, thankfully. So we installed an ITS kind of system with inductive loops, sign space in the wrong way with flashers on them. And the problem has all but went away. That's been many years, you know, not on wood. That's an indication, you know, that's an example where the crash data, you know, our normal traditional method of showing something's wrong, we just didn't pan out.
So I understand correctly, the 911 calls were saying there's a wrong way driver.
Many, many times, yes.
Uh-huh.
Several
just
times a
wasn't-
month.
Fortunately not
Yeah.
resulting in a crash.
Right.
But clearly all the
I
ingredients
don't know how
of a
it
crash.
did, because that's such a curvy section on the way that they were going the wrong direction. It was only, what happens is you come out of the stop sign, and if you look, you can see the closest to you at Rich Creek. And then there's a little bit of a drop off, and so you really can't visibly see the eastbound lanes from that stop condition. So we think people unfamiliar with the area are turning the wrong direction. It's only occurring one way. So,
That's a very good segue to what I wanted to ask, which is not so much a technical question, just a curious question. You said that most of the crashes seem to occur within maybe one exit or four exits. So I thought, you said crashes.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, what if someone's on the road, but it's not a crash? How do they fix it? How do you fix it when you realize you're going the wrong way on an interstate? Do you know anything about that? I don't know. I guess especially if I have all my faculties, I guess I pull over in the shoulder as best I can and I turn around.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you knew anything about that.
Yeah, I would say that's when people do realize that's the best course of action. And I'm sure that does happen much more often than we do see a crash.
Since most of them are happening at night, I guess, is there something that you thought you mentioned the lighted, the flashing sign, but is there something that, a different, like a more modern MPCD rather than just the wrong way signs? Or is there a level where you then go to the flashing beacon sign, or is there somebody does?
I think we did that just to be creative.
Okay. So there's no,
But, it was an actuated system, so it would only be, and we built it in-house, so it was not that big of a deal. And it's still there.
actuated flashing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the loops could tell the traffic, which one to cross first, across the downstream one first, and that's an indication of wrong way driving. So
I can see that.
then it sets off the flashers.
Pretty effective.
And it's close enough, there's a little bit of a straightaway before you get into the curvy section going east or to the east. So there's a certain amount of recovery opportunity there. So I think it's pretty much fixed.
Yeah, and
Include that example in your report. That's a really good example.
systems like that are more commonly used in some other states. Florida and has in particular done a lot of research in this area, and they have some examples of those types of systems on their exit ramps.
Was there any research into how it compares for an unlit interchange compared to more lighting?
Trying to think if we saw anything. Like
I'm not sure about there is a research, and we look into the HMMS system to check the lighting conditions. And found,
I was just wondering, because, yeah, if it's primarily at night, if
Yeah.
you lit the intersection or interchange, would that help?
yeah, I expect so. I think, yeah, there is, one of the variables they included, the lighting conditions.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to ask about the effects of GPS on this. People are driving at night in an area they don't know. They're trying to find which way to go, and, I've almost turned into a place I shouldn't have been because I didn't know the area, and the road was very close to the ramp that I was trying to turn onto. So has that been a consideration in your research?
Yeah, we have discussed that could be an issue with GPS, where if you can't maybe see the other road that you're being told to turn onto, and you can see one and you think, well, that must be it. My GPS is telling me to turn. It's definitely possible. But
We had this question here without exactly.
It was an exactly.
Did you want to add? It really does.
Are you separating the interchanges or focus on the interchanges that were under revision for crash data? I mean, my question is, I guess, if people are being confused as the interchanges being realigned, especially given that there seems to be a high percentage of the older population. I know personally, my grandfather who's passed away now, got into a real bad situation with some structure that had been long standing, and then had gone away for a little while. When it came back, construction was gone. It was just completely unrecognizable. It was 2 blocks from his house, but because the conditions were unfamiliar, it just makes you wonder with the older population at night. And then you had said that some of them, based on the satellite imagery, had changed current status. You were wonder if that was something you were trying to isolate.
yeah, we haven't. The interchange data that we're using is from one time period and doesn't include whether or not there have been recent changes. So not something that we're investigating now, but yeah, I could see how that could affect some decisions.
How was the data compared in terms of, I saw your top 10, the diamond interchange was number 1. Is that because the diamond interchange is just more common than other types of interchanges, or was it compared versus, was that somehow extrapolated based on the number of interchanges compared to the accidents?
I think both of them. Yeah, as there are many diamond types of interchange, they are overrepresented too. But those top score were summation of the scores for the wrong way driving. So
yeah,
total
both.
numbers are
So did the diamond interchange, did that include diverging diamonds, or was it just traditional diamonds?
Traditional.
Did you get any data on the diverging diamonds, or?
Yeah, we have it, but not the most current one that were done in I-64, exit 2 124. No, that was not updated, but yeah.
I'd be interested to see that zero back.
Yeah, for the data,
Yeah.
Yeah, we get it from the TOD, which was done by PHP, but I think by asking them we can share. Yeah.
You want to give us your email address or something, and we'll follow up with you?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
That was my thought too. We have one partial diverging diamond here, and we're building another one next year. And it sends you to the wrong side of the road, so it'd be interesting to see, if people follow the way they're supposed to go. Most of that is 50, but what people do in those situations if there are an increased percentage of wrong-way drivers in those interchanges because they're different.
Or what I was thinking on the reinforcement of, I wrong-way drove in Florida one night with my family when we first moved into town, and it was a one-way pair. It was a 2-way, 6-lane divided highway, and it came to a signal, and then the road pointed in the direction of what I thought was the right way, and I went, and there was nobody coming. I probably drove 6 blocks before I realized I hadn't seen a street sign I could read. Late at night, and it's a lit city, but there's nothing, no arrows, no nothing, until taking the way down the road, I looked in the cars, and I quickly found a parking lot. But it was maybe right at the first intersection, there was something I should have seen. But after that, there wasn't another sign, not a marking. In that town now in Florida, they have the reflective paper markers where you see the white side when you're going the right way, and you see the bright red when you're going the wrong way. That really catches your eye. And we put a lot of those in down there. But even though signs are cheap, just another, like half an mile from the exit, when you get on another sign that says, you know, you're going the wrong way, would be cheap insurance, I guess, in an area where you're having versus paper markings and things wear out. The signs have been 15 years of paper markings, where the RPMs, which are challenging to deal with anyway. I was thinking of we're doing like more alternative intersection types, like the DDI and the continuous green tees and these other things where you pair up, suddenly you have a car going between two directions of traffic, and we've got a couple of those where there's not like a real clear state of practice on how to sign and mark them. Every state's doing it differently, but you can see where it's one where when you're sitting at a T at nighttime, you're looking across and you see a median there, and you don't think you should turn here, but you're trying to, especially if somebody that's got vision difficulties, trying to see that spot that they're going to get into, that if they get there, they're good. But if they turn early around the median nose, they're going the wrong way. If we don't maybe reinforce with an extra set of signs or some highly reflective paper markings that are saying, no, don't go this way. They would want the alternative intersections. They can be challenging to navigate. They work really well, but they're not expected.
Okay. So I want to thank everyone for attending. Well, I'll give one last chance if there's any remote questions. Okay. I want to thank everyone for attending, for our in-person audience and for our remote audience. I handed out paper evaluations for our in-person audience, and the remote audience will be getting one sent to them after the presentation, after the Zoom meeting ends. And I want to thank our 3 speakers who drove down from Charlottesville. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the questions. This is the second series we've done. So we're kind of getting a little bit of experience with how to do it and how to do it in different rooms all across the state with a remote and a virtual audience. So thank you very much. If you want to be added to find out about the future ones that we're having, just let me know and I'll put your email address. All right, so round of applause. Thank you so much.